You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Pascaline Lepeltier. We'll talk to Pascaline about wine, her new book, 1000 Vines, and more. We will taste for our weekly wine sip, leave it to Pascaline, a Vietnamese rice wine. We'll talk about that later. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Pascaline Lepeltier is the most knowledgeable, influential, approachable, awarded, hardworking person in wine today. She has graced the airwaves of the Grape Nation many times, and I would have her on every week if she would agree to it, but that's not going to happen. A native of the Loire Valley, destined to become an academic in philosophy, Pascaline shifted to wine, becoming a master sommelier. And Pascaline, help me here with this because my French sucks. Un des meilleurs ouvriers de France, the sommelier category. She has also won the best French sommelier, produces Chapika wine in the Finger Lakes with Nathan Kendall, and just placed second in the best sommelier in Europe, Africa, and Middle East, to name a few accomplishments, along with being an author. Pascaline Lepeltier is a partner at Chambers in New York City and just released the English version of her new book, 1000 Vines, A New Way to Understand Wine. Welcome back to the Grape Nation, Pascaline.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
So we are talking to Pascaline at her beloved Chambers restaurant in Tribeca, New York. I want to congratulate you on 1000 Vines and the release of the English version. I know that the second it came out, I was up your butt and I said, we're doing a podcast. You said it's in French. I don't think we should do it in French. Wait for English. I said, when? You said, soon. And what is that, a year and a half later at least? So here we are, and I'm all for the better for it. I'll describe the book in a few words before we get into it. It's dense with information. It's intense in a good way, not the bad intensity. We were talking off air. To me, it literally covers everything, even history. It's a masterclass. When people talk about masterclasses or TED Talks, this book is a masterclass. There's science in it, so there's a scientific aspect that's approachable. It's certainly a resource. I enjoyed reading it. Usually I read the book because the guest is coming on, but as much as I've embedded myself in wine, this has helped me even more, and I love it.
Thank you.
So congrats. All right, so let's get into it. I want to talk to you about a few things in general. Wine relates to the book or separately, and then I really want to dig into the book. So in my mind, and I think a lot of people will agree, you're one of the most celebrated people in wine today, something that you've worked hard and earned. Ironically, even though you grew up in the Loire, you didn't really grow up around wine. But I want to tap into one thing. You were exposed to your grandfather and this natural ethos that he had, which I think kind of shaped who you are today. Even though it wasn't necessarily wine. Just tell me a little about that time in your life and your grandfather and sort of the effects now that it still has.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up, like a lot of people know, in the Loire, but my family was not in wine at all. And so there was no wine really on the table. There was no restaurant. But my grandfather on my father's side was from the region of Normandy. And he was a fruit monger It was in a small, very small commune in Normandy next to Donfront, where we make Calvados. He had a house with trees where we were selling the Calvados apple to people to make some Calvados. But the job of my grandfather was to do the market. He was going around in 6 different small communes of Normandy in the middle of the countryside. And he was selling fruit and vegetables. And in the basement of my grandparents' house, there was this very big, massive walk-in where he was keeping all the fruit and the veggie because he was going to buy them at the warehouse like twice a week. And I remember just all the smells. And when I was like a kid, I loved playing down, and we could eat all this fresh fruit and veggie. There was a garden. And it was very simple. Huh? We were really in the middle of Normandy, not a very wealthy at all area. And I saw my grandfather doing that. And when I was a teenager, I went to work on the market also with him, to make a little bit of money. Yeah. When I was on my holidays, and waking up at 3 a.m, and you prepare the truck, you take the fruit, and you go and you build the tent, and then you spend the day at the market, like the green market here. Basically, was a green market of, and all these memories. I just was attracted, I think, at that time by the smell and the taste. And same thing, he had very small, tiny.
Were you aware then? Like,
no, I don't think
this
so.
Smell, that smell, this is different.
No, I don't. I really don't think so.
No?
But no, I don't. And it took me a long time. Even like Sam, like my parents, my mom was not really a cook. So, but the only thing is because of that, of my grandfather on my father's side on one side, and my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a doctor, and he worked also in a very small village in Charente, and he was really against medication. So my grandfather was, every time we were sick, he was really trying to first cure us with food and vitamins, food as medicine. So on both sides, in fact, I grew up with very simple food, not very complex, not very like adorned, but always great products, and also a great feeling that a good food could help you. So I think that just shaped everything. And then, of course, I got my phase as a teenager. I wanted just processed food and bad beer and terrible spirits and all that. And then I saw the light.
See, I grew up with canned vegetables and red meat. So when people say that doesn't sound so different, I think a lot of people grew up different ways. Moving forward, a little later, you were sort of an academic and studied philosophy. I don't know if you and I have ever discussed this in past podcasts, but tell my listeners how your path from philosophy, which you put a lot of skin into that, time, study, tell me how that kind of morphed into wine, how the wine thing came about.
Yeah, I think for those that don't know me, I'm a pretty passionate person. So, philosophy was just an extraordinary moment of my life, and it's still, in fact. When you are 16, 17 in France, the last year of what we call the lycée, you have a mandatory year of philosophy when you're in the mainstream scholarship. And
wait, a mandatory year of philosophy specifically?
It's part of the courses. Or sometimes you just have 2 to 3 hours a week or 1 hour. On my case, I was doing literature, so I have 7 hours of philosophy. And I loved it. It was a revelation. It was like something that, suddenly when you have a key, or when you're watching a movie in 2D and suddenly we give you the right glasses for the 3Ds, and suddenly you're like, wow, why it was so powerful, because suddenly somebody was helping me to understand things around me, not by making me learn them by heart, but by suddenly saying, hey, but do you know why you are thinking things like that? Do you want to try to understand why? And that was a magical year. And so after this, even with my first class, I knew I had found the discipline I wanted to study, because before I could have done pretty much what I wanted. My parents wanted me to go to math and physics, and I was like, I'm like, okay, but I really liked it, but I prefer literature, but I didn't knew about philosophy. Anyway, so I studied really, I went full time into that. To a point that I went to different school and I discovered a philosopher I really liked. And I just started to literally binge drinking philosophy. Like it was.
Who was that philosopher?
The first philosopher I really studied was Plato, because I did a lot of ancient Greek before going into philosophy. But then I realized the pre-Socratic, and then I discovered Henri Bergson that I did my master on, and that led me to Nietzsche and Deleuze, so what we call the philosopher of life. And they talked to me way more than Kant or Hegel or some of the most classicist philosopher. And so I just literally binge drinked philosophy. And to the point that you have to think that I was thinking all the time how I am thinking. Like I was in such a meta world that I was observing myself all the time, thinking, wow, how is it possible that this sensation has been transformed in my brain, and what is it like? I was myself, my subject. And when you start to really go at that path is getting really obsessive. And the only way at that time for me to continue to have a career, to develop a career, was to go to become a teacher. And I was 21 and I was extremely young for suddenly having to teach philosophy, because the only students I could have had, would have been 17 or 18. So I would have been a 22 years old teacher for 17, 18 years old, which one day I really felt like I would have been a scam. And so I didn't have any life, just worked a little bit here and there, but my experience were almost minimum. So very good at jungling with concept, but I felt like I would have not been able to really develop. I would have been a scam. So I
took a philosophical view of philosophy of your life.
I took a sabbatical year, and I really had a burnt out because I was just studying too much and I was not really taking care of myself. And my philosophy teacher, the first one that gave me the love of philosophy, liked wine. Wine.
There's the first touch.
That's the first touch. I was really not feeling well, and the doctor were like, you need to go on medication. It was really a burnt out. It was an anxiety crisis and all. And I just didn't want to take medication because my family, even with doctor, never incite me to take medication. So they were like, you should just take a break. You just go to work. Just go try to do something with your hand, not with your brain. And my teacher said, what about going to start in a workshop, in a wine shop or a flower shop? So I started to work in small shops here and there, and I went to a wine shop and I was, what's that? Because
you knew very little about anything.
Nothing. 22, I knew nothing. No, it was really bad. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And the lady was extremely nice. It was a small wine shop. I didn't know shit. I put boxes on.
She was an important touch point too, I would guess.
Yeah, she was very, very sweet. She didn't know, we never, she welcomed me for a month, because it was very difficult for me to find an internship in France, a free job, because nobody wanted to pay me, because of course they didn't know anything. And so I stayed for a month, and then at the very same time I wanted to make a bit of money for myself, because 22, you're making no money, you're back at your parents, it's a little bit hard. And so I started to work in a catering company, and I discovered the world of restaurants. This catering company was a beautiful one, very high-end on the coast. And suddenly I was serving and working in the kitchen.
Was that at that point more hospitality than culinary? The process of serving people, not...
Yeah. I like the serving side, but catering, it's very simple. I just had to be fascinated by the culinary side, because I started to taste things. I was like, but that's really good. That's very interesting. Wow. And suddenly I discovered the world of gastronomy, basically. And this is when I realized that I could smell. I was picking on details. The pastry chef was like, wow, did you notice that? I said, yeah, of course I noticed that. And I didn't realize it, but I had such a pleasure. And that sabbatical year, I told at the end at my parents that I wanted to go into restaurants. I said I would have to.
So at that point, you had made your mind up to move in a direction that was different.
We'll give it a try. Yeah, but it would have been restaurants. It was not wine yet. It was restaurants. It was restaurants.
So you did go into the restaurant biz, and I'm guessing being at restaurants, the wine thing really escalated with you?
Yeah, so I wanted to go to culinary school to learn the base, because in France we have a lot of culinary school. You know, it's how you learn when you're 16, 17. So you learn all the culinary base and then the service base because of all this heritage in France. And I couldn't find any. They thought all the school I applied to, they thought I was stupid. I had too many diplomas. It would be stupid for me to go to culinary school. Like, it was still that moment of time when people look at culinary school like a dead hand. You know, it's like you are there because you can't do anything else with yourself. And so they're like, you are stupid, don't do that. And so I applied to like private school, but they were super expensive. And I didn't want to take a loan, and I didn't want my parents to pay for that. And so I went back to university. And in my hometown, there was a master and an MBA on hospitality management. And thanks to friends, I wrote a whole argumentation that way I should go. They should take me, and they took me. And so I went back to university when I studied restaurant and hospitality management and gastronomy. Like, I was a master in French arts, so I studied how French luxury arts came to be it fashion, being wine, being a bunch of other things. And I had wine classes during that time. And that
really resonated.
That resonated. And I started, without noticing, I started to spend the weekend going to some wineries to try to understand a bit more.
It really blew up then.
He grew up, and I still wanted to more work in catering, restaurants. And my internship was in a very famous caterer in Paris, where I spent 9 months. Really major stuff, like, you know, the one that are doing fashion weeks, all this extraordinary thing we did, like wedding in Versailles, like extraordinary things.
Big time.
Big time, big money. And I met Rudy there, knowing at the very end of my internship that I liked wine. I wanted to go there for the wine, but they were not taking girls in a cellar. So I ended up in another department doing administration work. But the met Rudy's and were so friendly, and they became really friend with me, and they knew I liked wine, and they brought me that bottle of Icam 37 at the very end of my internship to taste. And we tasted it, and literally that night, I went back.
Did you know of Icam by then?
No, I did not. No
so besides not knowing about it and it being different than what most people perceive as wine, tell me about that.
No, that was... it's not right. I heard about it, but you have even my class that I had at universities, they were pretty light in terms of in-depth. It was just 2 hours a week. No, it was a magical experience. That's it. It's literally magical. I remember it was a Friday afternoon. It was at 3 p.m. or 2:30 p.m. and we had just like little plastic coffee cup to taste
That's what you drank it out of?
Yeah, it was in the office in Paris. Like,
but did that kind of set off? Like, after tasting that.
Oh, yes, that's set off. Yeah.
Knowing your personality a little, it's like, I need more. What is that? What does this lead to? Where is that from?
I set off the fact that I wanted to work in wine, and there was not a billion emotion, and I knew I wanted to be in touch with wine. And so I went back to vocational school. And that night, I called a friend. Now he's one of my mentors. He had a wine shop. He was a teacher in a vocational school. And he said, yeah, you can still sign up. It was literally in September. You can still sign up. You have like a week, and you need to be below 25 years old. And I was 24 years old and 9 months. And I didn't have enough like work experience to enter the vocational school. So they kind of combined all my internship, my catering internship, my month in that wine shop. And together I just managed to be just at the limit of work experience. And that Monday morning, I signed up at the vocational school, and 2 weeks after I started. And you have to think, I was 24 after all these MBAs,
right? And
it was I was with 16 and 17 years old kids that were. And then I struggled to find a restaurant to take me as an intern because
was being a woman an issue then?
A little bit, but the biggest issue was I was arriving at 24 with zero really restaurant experience and like all this university background. And the world of restaurant at that time, we were still extremely pragmatic, and they were like, you don't know, like, why should we hire you? You absolutely know nothing about being on the floor of the restaurant. I know nothing about wine.
So, you need that one person who's willing to take a shot.
And I found that one person. And that one person is Mr. Jacques Torel. And he had this, I didn't even know the insane wine list that he had. I was given a list of names and I sent email, I called, I went, and that was one of the last one. And he didn't need me. He had already 2 sommeliers, 2 women. He liked to work with women. He worked with his wife and all that. And he took me because he had the biggest collection of culinary book in France, private culinary book.
Oh, wow.
Exceptional. He has more than 20,000 books in it. It's insane.
Did you?
No, I didn't know. But
did you start reading, pulling them out?
No, but we started to indeed. I know he hired me because he knew that he could finally have somebody to talk to.
Right.
And he said,
Not a 17-year-old just getting out of the lycée
No, absolutely. Let's look at the value of the translation of the poem.
So that was the breakthrough?
No, that was a breakthrough.
And then how long did you spend there?
A bit more than a year. And it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary.
And from that point on, were you able to sort of navigate a direction you wanted?
Mm-hmm.
Because you had the confidence, a little experience, job under your...
But this is also, again, is a good starting point with the book. That was at that moment that I realized that I knew nothing, that the world of wine was extremely vast and complex. And that how do you start? Where do you start? So I could start at the restaurant and working with the wine that we had on the list, which were exceptional. This was my starting point. So I had to literally learn as quickly as possible, as many producers as possible from the benchmark region. So by that time, we already had some monography on Burgundy, on Bordeaux, on Champagne. So that was pretty easy for me to read. And my school happened to be in Angers. And once a month, we're in Angers. And I had the opportunity to go in a vineyard. And so I met people. But you have to think at that time, I was 24, I didn't know stuff about restaurant, but I knew how to learn. I already had this 7 years of university background. I was doing research. I was preparing my PhD. So reading books was no problem for me. Getting synthesis, knowing where to find the information was no problem for me. And I wanted it. So
So knowing where to find it was something you were able to do. When you found it, did it satisfy? I mean, was there enough? Was it contemporary enough?
At the beginning, absolutely. I remember, I didn't know anything. So it's also, and the philosophy also study helped me to know that you can't discard something right off the bat. It's very important to read some a position and to read the counter position to be able to make yourself your own opinion. So, no, I read so many books. I bought so many books. It's like I'm a book lover. My house is full of books. So I say to subscription to I could also read in English because I was already reading in English. So I got subscription to Wine Spectator, to Decanter, to Revue du Vin de France. I went already, internet was already here. I was online. I bought Robert Parker for Bordeaux. I bought, of course, the Atlas Jancis Robinson, anything. And I was just reading. And my friends in Angers were helping me to also telling me you need to go to vineyards. So I started to travel and I traveled right away.
Did you feel compelled to taste as much as you needed to read?
I was absolutely everything I could taste. Everything I could taste.
I would think so.
It was
no
a
fun
candy
just
shop.
Reading about it.
No, it was a candy shop, and I started to. And Monsieur Torel didn't want us to taste the wine when we were opening them, so I still was tasting the wine. And at the end of the night, I was like, and I find my notebook from that time because I was and I was like, every wine I opened the night before at the restaurant, I was putting some notes, and at night or the day after in the morning, I was looking online to know what I opened the night before. So I started this whole and yeah, it was like, wow, I tasted that. I really liked it. What is it? Oh, it's a wine from the Southwest. I never heard about Cahors. Oh, that's a Cahors. It's a Malbec. What is Malbec? So I like this wine. And I don't like this wine. I like this one. And Monsieur Torel was super was super. At the beginning, he was very grumpy. It was like, what are you asking me all this question? And I'm like, I need to know. Tell me about it. Tell me why it's so good.
Inquisitive.
It's like I have no time.
Sounds like
I'm
an
making
obsession at this point, right?
And it became an obsession again.
Okay.
It was cool.
So, how long after that do you leave to come to the States? Where are we at as far?
I left for the States because I was in 2006-07. I left for the States. I started to work for Rouge Tomate in 07 and started to travel to US in 08.
The time we were talking before you went to Rouge Tomate, what year was that?
06 or 07.
Oh, okay.
It was
So
literally
that
before.
you really got your sea legs.
I got the-
Self-taught, taught by professionals, tasting, traveling vineyards and all that. So you go to Rouge Tomate, I guess, through a recommendation or...
It was really by chance, totally by chance. I knew I wanted to work abroad. I also knew that I was already 24, 26. I knew I need to go abroad, and I was already old. Like for my field, I was already quite old. So I applied to Alain Ducasse because, there was not that many way to go abroad at that time. And I wanted to work with a French company and send my resume to Ducasse, and it was really literally overlooked, and they said we can only find you a place eventually, like wine shop in Paris that you will be like in a warehouse. I'm like, there is no way. But fortunately for me, there was a development center at Ducasse, and the director left a month after, and totally by chance he saw my resume before leaving, and he was developing Rouge Tomate. And they were looking for, you remember my resume, and they were looking for someone that could help with the beverage development of Rouge with a university background, because it would have been like developing a whole charter, nutritional charter with scientists, but also an operational background that had an idea about restaurants. And he knew that I worked with Monsieur Torel. And he said, if somebody works with Monsieur Torel and is still going for it, that person has a nerve to the project. So he called me out of the blue and say, I saw your resume. We have this new project. Can we meet? So,
how long were you there?
10 years.
Yeah, because I ate there a bunch of times.
10 years.
When I met you,
yep.
I made my business to get there, and that wasn't 14, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was, whenever. So you kind of moved from Rouge Tomate to where you're at now. We'll weave that in. I wanted to ask you a couple other things, and then let's jump into the book. It's impossible for your background in philosophy not to affect the way you think. And let's talk specifically about wine, right? Or have you kind of let that go a little? Are you overly philosophical about wine?
Depends on the moment of the day.
Okay, but that's anything, all of us.
No, but the wine helped me to go back to my, I was obviously too much in my head. The wine helped me to
meld the two.
Yeah, to be grounded, to have a contact with reality.
That's good.
And it's still absolutely the case. So it's funny sometimes. I feel I can have a switch in my head when I tell my brains just stop thinking for 2 seconds.
And that then, works yes, for the time.
You know what? That works.
You couldn't do that early on.
I could do that. No,
that's where you had to kind of move away from things.
Yeah.
I want to ask you kind of a broad question. It may be too broad, too general, but you could handle it and take it wherever you want. I'm asking because I'm curious about it. Can you talk about the transformation wine has gone through in your lifetime? And you have to pick your spots. I mean, you've mentioned through the book and other things I've read, wine was once a luxury product chosen by a few. We've seen industrial commodification, natural wines. Consumption today now is down. That's an issue today. That wasn't an issue then. Greenwashing, to name a few things. I mean, what are the important transformations, good or bad, that you have witnessed? And in my next question, I have something that I think may address that. But what do you...
Oh,
the book covers it in a million different ways, by the way.
Yes, the book, and to answer your question, was really about also putting things in perspective, which is something we always say, but putting things in perspective, and realize that we are in dynamics. There is things that are changing all the time. Like things are changing all the time. That's the flow of life. We know that. And there is dynamics coming from a lot of different parts of our environment. We have natural dynamics that you count in eons or billions of years, be it the rotation of the Earth or the action of the sun. And you have extremely quick dynamics. Some of them linked to the incredible development of human ingenuity over the last century, thanks to our use of energy.
AI today.
AI today for you, and it's just the beginning. So the book was really about trying to explain or show the light on all these dynamics and explaining certain were very compressed, others have been extremely long. And today I think wine is a symptom of a little bit these dynamics and where we are right now, because it's led, like wine is connected to the natural cycle. Things that so far we haven't.
People forget.
We haven't really been like, even we can't really speed up or slow down, or we can, like it's like there's a question of the climate change.
Not in a good way.
Not in a way. After the good way is for us as a civilization
Manipulation.
today. As a civilization today, maybe not in a good way, but it's changing. So you have this cycle that are on the long term, and you have cycles that become on a very, very short term and extreme, almost immediate. One of the most immediate cycle for me is our ability to pretty much fulfill, if you have a bit of money, any of your desire in 1 second on a click of your phone, which is incredible. You look on something on the internet, you like it, you click it, you buy it, it's yours. So for the wine, when you think about that, it's realizing all the incredible change and the acceleration of certain changes on the wine side that occurred thanks to this acceleration of technology on one side, and the change of what is society today and what society needs today. 50, 60 years ago, you were in France in the 70s, in the 60s, 70s, or a little bit more, 80 years ago, wine was 110 hectoliter liter per person per year. It was on the table. It was drunk at lunch. You could still drink it in school. Okay, kids were allowed to have a little bit of wine with water and cider with water.
Kind of ubiquitous.
In the 1960s, wine had this calorific, daily, restorative qualities that allowed to have this extreme expansion. You still had people making their own wine in their backyard. You had very few wineries that were 100% dedicated to wine. A lot of them were still polyculture. They were doing other things, arboriculture with like fruit growing in the Rhone. So you had that. It was 80 years ago. Then you had the transformation with technology and the evolution of what happened with enology. A cleaner cellar, acceleration with use of the yeast, a better understanding of fermentation, malolactic finally understood in the 1960s on one side, and then you have the use of new fertilizer on the other side. So suddenly agricultural, the product was totally modified, and you could do more in a cellar to make it whatever you wanted. And you get into that processed thing, but that it's the late 70s, early 80s, 90s. It's extremely recent.
Right.
And we went into that excess that led to people starting to think this is not what I used to taste. So they still had the experience, the personal experience of tasting wine 15, 20 years before and said there is something wrong. And then you started to see the counterpart with the beginning of organic, biodynamic, and going back to that place. And then went to such a moment of society where some of the people were also seeing this kind of wine as something a little bit more of an engagement against the system. And you became from natural wine for the pleasure of drinking more wine, the Gang of Four and all, to an engagement saying that's an anti-system, because the society was also said to dictate rules and code and standardification, and they didn't want that. And you put that together with a market that changed a lot, because within 80 years, status of wine totally changed in most of our society. It's not anymore your daily drink that you have. A lot of things happen with the question of health. So what is healthy, what is not healthy? Is wine dangerous? Is alcohol dangerous? And we have suddenly, thanks to technology, way more choices into the production we can have, from distillation to beer and all. So when you think about that, everything happened in one generation or maximum 2 generations.
It's crazy.
It's an
That is the transformation.
insane amount of modification of something that was so central to a culture. And this is also where wine is very special, is because we talk about wine with this idea of tradition and heritage. So some of the parameters, some of the concepts, some of the ideas that are helping us to understand wine today, we are still projecting things that were real 200 or 100 years ago, but they are not efficient anymore of this way of understanding it. You know what I mean? It's like, so we are begging, you take the main appellation, you take all that, they are linking their values, their fame to that heritage thing that's been.
Right.
But this heritage is not at all what we're living today. So the transformation of wine, look, 10 years ago, nobody was talking about co-ferment. Nobody was talking about hybrids. Nobody was talking about that. Now it's everywhere, and everything goes extremely quickly, because we have also the ability to diffuse messages way faster. So what I'm seeing is cycles that are shorter in terms of a certain evolution of the product itself. So it doesn't take as long to create something new. You have a lot of idea in the production side,
right?
But the cycle didn't change as much in the viticultural side. And they know they are handled with all these extremes. So we have this kind of dichotomy, schizophrenia between all these cycles, and how can we make them work together?
So we got to take a quick break, and we'll talk about it after the break. But, I've been doing the podcast. I'm going in the 9th year, and one of the things that I noticed that I talk about is sort of the shift, the discussion, the shift to farming and viticulture, more than before. We didn't, guests come on and talk, you said there's no wines without the vines, and, wine is nothing without its microbial biology. Am I right that one of the transformations, and certainly the discussion, is in the area of viticulture, farming, and out in the vineyards?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it more than anything? Is it an equal part, or you really have to start and focus there?
You without soil there is no ability to grow. Without not growing a plant, there will be no grapes, and without grapes, even
and
with
how you do it.
Yeah, and with our own I'm sure at one point we're going to be able to make artificial wine from nothing, from just a compound. Like we are going to have at one point the technology. I don't know when, but would have the.
I mean, they've tried that with meat. I don't
Yeah,
know
but
how good that was.
I mean, look how quick it goes.
Yeah.
Look how quick it goes. This is, and maybe in the future we may not even need to have the feeling of it. This is the thing with happening. It's what I mean is the future is very open, and I don't think we know where we're
I know
going.
We've talked about transformation
It's
in
like
the
crazy.
last 5-10 minutes. Nothing that crazy. I hope it doesn't come to that.
But with the viticulture, yes, you're absolutely right, and that's also it comes from the. I think wine and viticulture are the big part, because out of all the agricultural project is one that is the most valorized in terms of how much money you make out of the grapes, and how important it is today to understand.
Right.
So there is funding.
That's a good point.
There is
a
money.
Practical point.
There is money going into that. And so today there is so much economic challenges for the viticulture and how much billions it represents, that you have people that, yes, they realize that the soil is extremely important. It has been neglected. And yes, we need to understand the soil more than ever. And suddenly it's part of the discussion, but everywhere, scientific to vulgarization, thanks to books about trees and all. So today it's not a subject that people are scared of. Yep.
We have to take a quick break. We're talking to Pascaline Lepeltier. We're going to talk to her about her new book, 1,000 Vines. You're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, Pascaline Lepeltier. At the top of the show, I told you about everything Pascaline does. We're going to focus on her book, 1000 Vines. Pascaline, you wrote the book, what is it, a couple of years ago in French?
Yeah, I wrote the book like during COVID, so it was
Longer.
Yeah, so it was 2020 to 2020 to 2022, and the book came out in November 22 in France.
Right. And you and I are talking because, there's now this fall, the English version came out. I want to talk to you about the book and just get a few vitals out of the way. You just answered a few things. How was the book conceived? You may have alluded to it, early on when you were working in France, but something hit where.
The book was conceived because I started to teach more and more here. And I was a little frustrated about the way we were teaching about wine and what was taught in wine classes. And I was really bothered by the fact that way too rarely we were touching about the why. So it was really about saying such and such is an appellation, they're making this style of wine, is this style of grape, this is the producer you need to taste. And you need to know by heart that it's 13.5% and they have to be aged for 18 months. So, great. But why? Because of this way of teaching made me think that people could think it's been always like that. You have this idea that if it's like that today, it must have been always like that.
Right.
And we touched upon before that, but wine has been, especially the last 100 years, has been incredibly subject to change. So it was always a question of Sancerre. I was always bothered by the way I was teaching about Sancerre. People think, and you were taught during your examination, that Sancerre is mostly a white and has to be this crisp, no malolactic, stainless steel, Sauvignon Blanc, very lean, and that's Sancerre. That's a typical Sancerre. And when you go for a wine tasting and a blind tasting for a top examination, this has to be Sancerre. You can't have another. Right. This is a standard. And I talk about this example because I went multiple times to Sancerre, and I knew Sancerre, as is it today, is a very recent creation. It's like really a profile of wines that got defined a bit in the late 80s, but really exploded in the 1990s. And before that, Sancerre, when you taste some of the great names still today, the Cotta and Halls, they were oaked. There was sometimes the malolactic. There was some sweet Sancerre. And then when you start to do more research, there was a lot of red. And before World War I, there was a lot of reds that were also sold. They were selling the Pinot Noir to Champagne. In fact, they were using it to make. And so you realize, but what is Sancerre? I couldn't keep on teaching people Sancerre is that. I had to say Sancerre is that today. And today maybe it's also a dead end for Sancerre because the technique and the way they are making the wine can be duplicated everywhere in the world. So it's why also Sancerre said to be in crisis. But Sancerre is way more complex than that. And it used to be different. Also, we don't have a lot of aged Sancerre because it was put in barrel and sold in Paris directly. So very few people bottled old Sancerre. So we don't have an idea of what Sancerre tasted like in 1950s and 60s. So I'm like, we need to explain this economy. We need to explain why are we here today and why today this is a style of wine that is made in Sancerre and what is the potential future. Because behind that, for me, the biggest problem is when you think this is the only way, this is the only standard, you are not allowing yourself to think about adaptation that is needed for the future because we need to adapt. There is no other choices. We need to adapt to what? Either to the climate, so that we know there is this extreme, to the market, to the reality. And today, one of the reality is that viticulture is sick of pesticide because there is disease in the vine that we don't know how to control and that requires an endless use of products. So we know that at one point there will be a need to evolve in that. So we know that we are going to have to evolve. But if you think that the only way to make a living, the only quality wine is just that very specific style of wine because they have always been like that, you are wrong. And this is what I wanted to teach.
And that answers the question of why did you write the book? And that was to have a book that you never had and to be able to address and present those issues. Fair to say that?
Yeah, it's a book. Honestly, I wrote it for me because there was a lot of things that I felt I had an intuition or an idea about, but I never really kind of deep dive into the origin of wine, the
And you couldn't
domestication.
find, looking around, the depth you were looking for, or the why, not.
No, I found it. No, I had it. There was no problem for me finding papers, but they were university papers. They were academic papers. And as I told you, I'm not scared of academic papers, even in a discipline I don't know, because I have enough friends that could help me to understand things I didn't know. So I could find all these incredible academic papers from every field. Some people, extremely brilliant searcher, but unfortunately, if you didn't have an access to, I don't know, the database of all, one of my friends gave me his access to the library of universities. So I could just check online and get access to all these papers. And I suddenly realized, oh, but somebody just wrote something about that question. And I started to read it. Like, wow, that's interesting. And he's giving me that name and that name. And so that's what I did for the book. It was really a very selfish book about all the questions I was asking for.
That's the best book, though.
Asking for myself what I wanted to have some answer or no answer, but at least some tools, some ideas to think better the problem, be it farming, being the question of microbiotes, being the question of hybrids, being the question of grafting, being the question of sensory analysis, being the question of mouse, being the question of marketing label, being the question of cork. Like I had all these questions. And so I took every subject and I went and I did my research. I tried to see what were the most current papers, which were the specialists in all these disciplines. I tried to read their papers. Sometimes it was big books and I couldn't really, it was like such intense, but every time then you have even a 1,000-page book, you often have a critique of it, or you have an article, or you have a conference where you have the synthesis of it. So I was looking for that. And then the whole deal was, how can I make it clear also for myself, but also for somebody that is new to the field?
A lot of synthesis.
Yeah, and with the idea that whoever is going to read it is somebody smart.
Well, so I want to ask you about that, because when I first really looked through the book and then read it, I realized this book's different, and I want you to talk about this. You didn't write this book for everyone. I mean, is it fair to say it's really for people with a predilection towards wine? I mean, there's enough. How do you think of it that way?
No, I really hope anybody that, it's a book about wine. So at the end, you may need a little bit of an interest in wine. But I think if you're interested in marketing, in science, in anthropology, in philosophy, in any field, I hope you're going to be able to find something in this book. I really wrote the book.
So because I've read a few reviews and, a lot of praise, only praise, and a lot points towards, the amount of information, and maybe this isn't for the neophyte wine guy. You're disputing that a little. Everything about wine is in there and you could find it, and you don't have to read it cover to cover. Of marketing or just the domestication of vines. So you're not sitting here saying to me, this is just for the really interested. This is for everybody.
Yeah, I rewrote it for everybody. I also rewrote it once again with the idea that I'm a little bit sad and I'm a little bit worried about how today we're communicating information. A lot of things is really dumbed down to the very base.
Right.
And people are saying, it's because it needs to be accessible for everybody. I think at one point, when you go too low, it's an insult for the person that is reading you.
Too high, you alienate.
Yeah, you need to find the right amount. But I really believe into use of your critical sense and everybody's intelligence. I really believe into that. Everybody has a center of interest. Everybody can understand. It's really what I was trying to do with this book.
I don't think you go too low, and I don't think you go too high. You may go very thorough, but that doesn't mean inaccessible.
Yeah, it was absolutely not the purpose of the book. The first person that read my book was my mom. So yes, she's a teacher and she did university study.
What was her?
She's a doctor in plant physiology, but my mom taught for more than 15 years to teenager. So, she had all the credentials, but
Right.
totally. So she knew that I really wanted to be accessible. She knew that it was dense, it was precise, it was concise, because all the idea was to have really sub-chapters between 2 to 8 pages. So I had to really write a lot of information. But she also helped me, and my best friend also helped me with that, because also she's not in wine at all. And I have an amazing editor in France to try to make it clear and really to try to express things that seem complex in clear ideas. And this is something I took from the best philosopher for me. The greatest philosopher, Bergson is one of them, Alain is one of them. They could express really ideas that everybody would be scared about because you think it's like impossible to understand in clear, simple way. And this is what I try to do. And then, yes, that idea of neophyte, you may be a neophyte in wine. Great. It's the beginning of your life in wine. But you probably are somebody that has an interest in something else, and you're probably passionate, or you probably your job, or you're probably very knowledgeable in another field. It can be anything. It can be sport. It can be, once again, finance. It can be, and you understand stuff, and you're able. So you can find, or maybe not sports, because I don't think I talk about sports, but strategy or evolution of the mind, or I'm reading a lot of sports philosophy and psychology right now about how to become a better tester, better focus. So I talk about that in a book. So you're a sports person. Maybe you're going to be interested by going into the tasting chapter and understand the physical performance that it is to taste. And so this is what I really try. I really wanted to give tools to people to feel less scared and to feel literally more empowered. I know the word empowered is overused today, but telling them you absolutely have all the capacities, you absolutely can understand. You will be able to get it.
I agree.
And that's what I really wanted to do.
And I'm glad you presented it that way. Let's talk about the book, the physical book itself. You broke the book down basically into 3 sections. I learned off air that maybe it should have been 4. Maybe we'll get to that. The 3 sections are reading vines, where you cover domestication, nature, ecology. The second section is reading landscapes, where you talk about climate, geology, terroir. And the third section is reading wines, which talks about the making of wine, tasting wine, serving wine. And those are just, there's 3 sections and those 3 subsections. And then within that is like a million, things of information. Can you do this for me? I think you can. Can you give me a brief description of each section? You don't necessarily have to get into the subsection, but go, wherever you want. Like, what do you mean domestication, nature, ecology,
Yeah. How did you come to
had an idea, I want to set it up this way because this is how I want to present it. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so this organization is a little nod to my philosophy background, because this is a perfect plan of a dissertation when you read about philosophy,
Right.
which is 3-part. It's a very Aristotle's structure. So we had to find a structure, because the way I was thinking about the book and the way I think about the book is not structured, in fact. So I'm going to go answer you first, and then I will tell you how I think the book should be read. So I wanted to go back from the beginning. Without a vine, there is no wine. So to understand, I think, wine today, its complexity, its diversity, its polymorphy, its ability to be grown everywhere in the world, is fascination, why people are so fascinated by the vine and the wine, because it's a historical fact in multiple civilizations. You had to understand first, why is this plant so unique? And why is that plant that, if you see it in the wild, looks like this tiny, undrinkable, uneatable berry? Why men, when it went for that?
Right.
And how the interaction between mankind and vine, that domestication, influenced both the vine and dramatically changed the vine in what it is today, and dramatically changed mankind, because wine has been at the center of a lot of civilization. So that part is really more focused on the vine itself, because it's a very specific plant, and it has been studied more than any other plants. Probably the other plants that has been studied as much are wheat, probably rice, because they are at the center once again of civilization. So there is a lot of study about that. And the question behind it for me was, why is that plant that we have been with for so many years is so sick today? Why? When we are at the apogee of our knowledge in terms of science, in terms of microbiology, we never learn, we never know, we know the most we ever knew, in fact. Today, vines are dying. We have all this disease. We have all these problems. We don't understand. We don't find solution. So why is it? Why is it such a problem today? Is it the monoculture? Is it because of the plant itself? Is it because of the way we are growing the plant? Or is it also because of the way we are relating to the plant, to the vine itself? And so that led me to question the botanics, the physiology, so to understand the plant itself, and then to try to understand how we grow it, how have we been growing it, and to understand then, because the vine is such a specific plant in agriculture, can it be used as an example to understand our relationship to nature? And maybe our relationship to nature, at least in Western societies, led to this idea that we are superior as human amongst every other living organism. We are different, and the rest is just tool for us that we can abuse for our liking. And maybe we should reconsider that big question of nature and culture, that big way, dichotomy of thinking the world. And this is where I'm finishing by offering a more philosophical perspective of what we call an ethnobotany. An ethnobotany is just the way a civilization is seeing nature. And our way of seeing nature is just one amongst a lot of different ways of seeing nature. And maybe if we change our way, we can maybe grow the plants in a different way.
So, do we have to worry about how to ensure the life and health of, these vines, which are just deeper and represent more than, us? I mean, are you worried that we're on a continuous path of that, or we're paying attention and addressing?
I think we don't address it fast enough.
So
at the end, we're going to be the ones suffering.
Do we understand it and don't address it, or we still need to understand it more?
I think we have enough thing to understand today to change, but we don't want to change our comfortable life. At the end, the peoples are going to suffer. Yes, the vine is going to suffer, the microbiome is going to suffer, but they're going to evolve. At the end, what's happening right now, we're suffering. It's us as humankind is like suffering in terms of economics. Some people can't make a living anymore with farming, or they're suffering at a health level with all the disease we know from mankind, or we are suffering in different way with all the political conflicts. So at the end, we also need to understand that we are the first ones that are going to suffer about our own practices in a different way. So yes, we need to change that. Yes, we have the tools.
In the second section, reading landscapes, I know you talk about geology. I mean, I know you're a big lover of dirt and rocks and terroir, but climate and how we handle all that plays into what you're talking about too, right?
Yeah, the second chapter was about, once we understand the plant, is what about the environment of the plant? And today, for sure, there is two big schools talking about climate, and climate is everywhere with this idea that all the problematic of climate change and climate expansion. So I wanted to go back with that, because when you read about people and the scientists talking about vineyard, they say first and foremost, number one is climate. You need to have the right climate to be able to...
climate change for a second.
Yeah,
when
so
you're planting...
you need to think about climate.
Right.
Even though today we can pretty much grow anywhere we want, because the technology is allowing us to grow wherever we want. That's a big good question. It's not because we can.
Do you buy into that? Is that a good, just because you can, or you shouldn't because it's not the best opportunity? No,
I don't necessarily buy into that. And at one point, you need to think about the resources and what in terms of energy and all. But man has always been exploring the fringes, the boundaries and all that. And what we are talking with this project is 0.0001% of the production. It's nothing. It's just experimental stuff. Experiment, can be interested. But yes, so I talk about climate. I talk about what how climate, which kind of climate, and then to kind of say yes, let's put back the climate in a larger question, which is how it affects the vineyard, but always within the vine, but also how it's affecting all the environment, including the soil and the microbiotes. And then I went on to study the idea of climatic terroir and moving to terroir as a geology fact. And because there is a cult of geology today, saying like limestone is the greatest terroir, or people putting in front of their label all the name of this is a basaltic wine, is it a granite wine, and does it make sense? Is it something that you can first? Does it make sense? Is it something that you can describe, or is it too complex because there is not one type of granite? There is multiple type of granites, and then there is multiple type of soil, and how this bedrock has been transformed by the influence of all happening on the crust of the earth. And so I went into that part, and I went to this idea of what is the soil, and it was really an ode to the soil. What's the soil? What's the living part of the soil?
Soil is not terroir.
Soil is a part of the terroir. Soil is a part.
So how do people hear the word terroir? I mean, how do you define it? I mean, now's a good time. We're talking about soil, terroir.
It's the last part.
How if it's climate?
It's the last part of the book. In fact, there is every little part of Earth is its own terroir.
Okay.
So the terroir is the interaction between the inorganic of the geology, the organic influence of climate and all the other weathering influence of all the living organism, and how a person is interacting with this. So it's really a triangle, and the problem with terroir is not a problem, but terroirs are absolutely unique, and they are singled out by the human activity on a specific part of the planet.
Right.
And there is a terroir in Manhattan, if you want, in a certain way, And this is how do you interpret that? What man as a living organism is gonna grow and develop on this very specific piece of earth, and which kind of dynamic is gonna be affected by his intervention, and what can he do with that? And suddenly people are starting to be extremely scared. Oh my God, it's so complex, so complex, so complex. But you're like, but it's life. Life is like that. You don't have to. And wine happens to be the possibility to see it. It's a very unique production in everything that man can produce, that has the ability, when it's done in a certain way, to materialize that very specific piece of land,
right?
That very specific moment in time,
right?
And this is why I've been fascinating people. It's not only because of alcohol,
right?
Because we find new ways to get alcohol. It's because it can transcend and materialize in something that we can appreciate, live, and enjoy a very specific moment of time and place in the history of this planet. And this is why we need to fight for it.
Yeah. That's well said.
And the last part of the book.
The last part of the book is reading wines. You talk about the making of wine, which after we just talked about terroir, you have the finished grape. You talk about making wines, things people struggle with, tasting wine, and serving wine. You talk about practical things down to glasses, so that section, I wanted to ask you something. Seeing and smelling wine, tasting and smelling wine is an interesting thing. Everyone approaches it, with different sensory exercises. As an expert or an amateur, you and I do it differently. You talk about this. There's a language of wine, and I think it's much broader than what I'm alluding to. But I think when people think of wine and the tasting and the smelling part, a lot of people get sort of lost in everything. What do you mean by the language of wine?
So the chapter is really about also, once again, make people feel more confident going from the physiological really explanation of what's happening, both in the wine itself
Right,
and
a little
in,
science.
and in us. Because somebody said, it's Axel Marshall in Bordeaux, he said, wine is born twice. Wine is born in a cellar, and wine is born in the head of the taster. So there is two births for wine. And
not in the field, not on the vine.
yeah, he was really talking about the transformation of juice, grape juice, you
Right.
know,
At that stage.
At that stage. So wine, not grapes, wine.
Right.
So you have the fermentation. So you have this biochemical, physical transformation, and then we absolutely need to understand wine inborn is in our head. So we are giving birth to wine, all of us, every single day when we take a sip of wine. And so I wanted to go through the physiology and to make people less scared or realize how much power that they have, how incredible their taste is, the nose and the palate are. It's amazing.
So much going on.
So much power. And unfortunately, we are not educated to it. Is out of all the senses, they are the one that are the less taught at school. Nobody is teaching us how to differentiate to carrots or to smell the spices or to develop that. We are not in a society, paradoxically, that is encouraging that. And so I wanted to first go on that and explain that's also normal that we don't taste the same. That's normal that you can't, that we have all a different DNA on top of the culture, and that's great. It's not a weakness, it's a strength, as long as we know about it and we can exchange about it. And so I wanted to talk about that. And then I wanted to say it's also normal that it's extremely complicated to talk about it because it's so incredibly powerful. There is so many information. And so don't be scared about not being able to talk about it just because you haven't been practicing. And then how to talk about it, it really depends on who you are talking to. And there is not one language of wine. There is really different languages of wine. And wine can become a partner for yourself to be able to know yourself better and to express yourself better with a vocabulary that you already master. It's just you haven't been trained to use it.
Right.
And from that, it was really about that. And I went less about this is the right language of wine because that is absolutely a nonsense. It's not true. But about
more, there is a language of wine,
there is
not
more,
the right.
There is multiple languages, and depending on what you are trying to achieve, a lot of them, all of them are extremely valid. If you are talking scientists, you are going to talk probably in chemical compound or molecule. If you are talking to somebody that in a wine shop, you may talk in a different with different vocabulary, or if you are talking as a person that example of ICAM, you know, I could describe it in 10 different ways. But if I really wanted you to feel what I felt, I would have to really think about an artistic way, probably about talking to you about color or senses of heat, or like maybe a song, or it will be pretty to make you feel how extraordinary it was for me
and relatable
and something so you could feel inside of you, because this is what I really think about. A good tasting note for me when I am on the floor is how can I make you feel from your own experience what I felt inside of me. Alors sometimes it requires a little bit more of a knowledge, of an intimate knowledge of a person, and it's why too often we are just using banalities or truth or words that are
right.
universal, because we don't know each other.
Right.
Or like I know you, so I'm pretty sure by now I could probably find a piece of art, a movie, or another wine, or another moment of your life when you felt that so strongly, and I will tell you this is what I felt.
I believe that, and I agree with that. Words like minerality.
Yeah.
There's a minerality to this. Whatever, we won't get into that.
But on that note, I'm also, the book was also written to try to encourage people to go, because we're using what we call in French pensif, or we're using concepts that have been over abused today. And I admire really writers. I really admire, and I was so happy about the translation, because I really picked every single word in this book, because I really believe in the power of word and to be exact, and not to just use something for something, and I really believe in the power of language. I think mastering a language is so beautiful. Learning new words, being nuanced and details, and paying attention to the word that you are using is so important. And unfortunately, today we are once again dumbed down, and we are using like a less and less word and sentences and grammar and syntax used. And what do you have at the end? You don't have a nuanced way of thinking anymore because you are just going to use these broad
Right.
broad
Good point.
ideas. So that's also, I think, why the books may
Well-
feel a little dense, but it's because I really try to be
But
precise with my words.
here's another good turn. You talk about words and the importance of a word. With this book, there's a visual aspect that was very important to me, and that was the illustrations. They're amazing, and I think a lot of the book's story is told through the illustrations. You could read something and go, and then you look at illustration, you go, oh, okay, kind of either defines, sets it up, expands on it or whatever. Two people helped you with the illustrations, Loan Nguyen and Tan Lan.
No, it's the same person. That Loan Nguyen Tan Lan. That's her name.
That's one name?
Yes. So Loan. Yes, Loan made all the illustration.
So how did you and Loan come together?
I was very lucky with my publisher in France, Hachette. My publisher believed in the book right away, which was amazing because I was like, well, you should. And
I think you had a foot in the door. I think they had a little trust that you could.
Well, it was supposed to be a 100-page book at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
I pitched that.
Good luck on that. This was supposed to be a 45-minute interview. Continue.
So no, and I told them what I had in mind. I knew I wanted to have this very gentle design and of illustration, like the book in the scientific book of the 19th century. And I wanted something extremely soft, but also very precise. And they found Loan, and we hit off right away. She's super young, hyper talented, and we really enjoyed each other right away.
So how does that process work? We talked about the 3 sections and how it gets into climate, and terroir and all of that. Do you have these images in your mind that you tell her and you say, here's the subject matter, here's what I'm thinking, how can you illustrate it? Is it like that?
No, I created all the images. I told her, this is the map I want, but I want that and that and that. So I was looking. It was sometimes we were using stuff already from scientific paper. We reused the work of other people. We adapted it or we created it. And so I told her for each sub-chapter, I was writing the text and I had the image, I have the source, and I was using InDesign or stuff.
So in a good way, you had a heavy hand. But she was able to.
I conceptualized all the illustration and she then draw them. But no, I am the one behind all the illustration.
There's probably 1,000 illustrations.
No, there is 110, I think. But
that's it?
Yeah. But I knew, I had to be the one doing it because I knew
I counted each glass, not the illustration of a glass.
Yes, there is a lot of glasses in it. No, but there is a lot of small details I can show you. But because I knew what was in the chapter, in the text, I was the one knowing what was eventually missing in the text that I wanted to talk about, but we didn't have the space or what I thought would be important to understand the text. So no, I was like, I like this, I really like this design of a leaf. I like this design of a roots. I like this design of a tree. Combining the 3 together and say, Loan, this is what I want, and I really want that to be highlighted. This one to be bigger, and so we worked on that.
Well, a lot of executing the vision, helping explain the book and all of that. We talked about this before we started the interview. I asked you, are you going to treat 1,000 Vines as something, let's say, as the World Atlas of Wine, where it's because we talked about how the wine world moves so much that you'd probably have to update it every few years as things change? I mean, is that something you would do, or you just say, screw it, I'll write another book?
No. I don't know. So between the French and the English version, you said it was 2 years. It took a year plus to translate, and by that time there was already some changes.
Right.
So what we did, we already updated it. So the English version.
So this is in a sense an update.
It's an updated version.
But you and I know from talking 2, 3, 4 years from now, things will change? Do you feel?
It will be a decision from the publisher. I really try to write the book with also a lot of thinking and concept that could be valid for quite some times. But you're absolutely right. The field of science, especially everything with neuroscience, genetics, is moving extremely fast. There is already one thing I didn't mention in the book that is missing in the terroir chapter, which is right now and the development of a new idea for the legislation of the appellation system, which in France people are pushing, and it's really new, really pushing out. It's been a couple of years, but now this year is really the year where we start to really talk about it, which is appellation d'origine durable. So instead of calling an AOC of control, appellation d'origine contrôlée, controlled or protected, AOP, there is a talk to become durable or sustainable. So original appellation sustainable, where the microbiotopes will be considered part of the AOC system.
Oh, that's great.
And they're talking about it at the European level with legislation. So that is already missing from the book. And I couldn't talk about it before because it was not yet in. There was also some research about the guts at the sixth senses with proprioception. So I just touched a little bit on the book, but there is a big paper coming out next year about how guts influence the way we are tasting wine. So yes, things are going to change. But after that, it's
do you have
publisher
floating in your mind separate of this? Another book idea, or you've had your fill for now?
So let's just go back to the updates. I know that the book may be of interest for other countries in other languages, maybe Spanish and Italian. And so if we do Spanish and Italian, if I have to overlook the translation again, I will do again an update.
Right.
And in that case...
So that's an interesting sort of direction, because I think Spain is an important wine market, and certainly we know Italy is. So there's an opportunity for you for exposure and then for update.
Yes, and in that case, with the English is already sold out, in fact. And we're going to reprint
Oh, great.
So it's
That's
amazing.
Great news.
So what that means is if we are sold out and we do a reimpression, that means that if I start to work if I start to work in another language and we do the update for the other language, it will take a year and a half probably to do it, or 2 years, like a year and a half. I will be able at that time to redo a second edition with the updates from the other languages. So we are thinking about that. And
so 3-4 years from now, if I want the most updated version, I have to learn Spanish. Okay.
No, because I think in that case, it's what we did for the French.
You'll be able to.
No, what we did for the French, in fact, I did all the changes I put for the English version. I put it in a French version. So now we are the reimpression for the French is updated with the English version. So. So I just need to do it for every languages in the world, and it will be updated every 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to move on to a couple things. I want you to answer our wine list, which you've done before, and I want to taste this very cool wine you pulled out. But before we get into that, I just want to say that virtually, in my mind, anything that has to do with wine, from domestication through tasting and talking about the wine, is discussed and explained in this book. And I think that you and I, broached on a lot of it, because you really have to buy the book and reach it. But I've never seen anything so thorough. And I'm glad you addressed that this really is a book for everyone if they're interested. You don't have to be intimidated. Well, I don't know that much about wine. It sounds good. No, there's something for everyone. And lastly, do you recommend, that's not the right question. Can you read this book out of order?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking this question.
Is it bad not to read it in order?
It's made for that, in fact.
Okay.
So you read it as you want.
Right.
You can read it from...
Which lets people go to what interests them first.
Absolutely. It's a book where if you want to read from front to cover, you can. And I touched to it about that at the end of the introduction. The inspiration for this book, of the way to build the book, is a philosophy book called 1000 Plateaux.
What does that mean?
It means 1,000 plateaux. So I'm a little I wanted the title in English to be Thousand Plateau, not 1,000 Plateau, because the English translation of the French book Mille Plateaux is 1,000 Plateau. So it's a nod to a book written by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, which was a very important book for me. And in this book, they develop the theory of the rhizome. The rhizome is a way of plants to develop, like ginger, for example.
R-H-I-Z-O-M-E,
yeah.
rhizome.
Rhizome, and the difference of the roots. So the roots, you go down, and the roots in the tree of knowledge, usually you think that you need to have a basic knowledge, fundamental knowledge to grow up, and there is a structure of knowledge. And the rhizome, the idea is like the internet. You can enter everything, and depending on, because there is this incredible dynamic network that influence everything, there is no entrance and there is no exit. You are in, and you can go through that. And the book Mille Plateaux by Deleuze and Guattari was written like that. You don't have to start by the first chapter. You can enter, and that's what I wanted to do. So it's why all the chapters are short. They're between two. There's a subchapter between 2 to 8 pages.
It's very
and you can just
accessible that
and
way.
you can just enter wherever you want and do your own little digression.
And then you can approach it that way. You can also put it in your collection, and because of that, it becomes a valuable resource.
Yeah, you
really,
you can just
I know
pick it
you
up.
as a little kid used to read encyclopedias. There's an encyclopedic thing to this.
Yeah, it's really
without
that,
even looking at the contents or whatever. Not the contents.
So but the idea is like I wanted interdisciplinarity. So by reading out of order, suddenly you are connected marketing and botanic. Suddenly you are connected anthropology and aesthetic. Like
they're all connected, but that brings it to your mind, at once and all of that. Very cool. All right, let's wind down. I want you to answer our wine list. You've done this a few times before. At some point, I'm going to have to do some comparison. I asked 5 questions. They're the same 5 questions I've asked the previous 288 interviewees. So we're going to start with the first question and I'm interested in this one. What are you drinking now? What's in your fridge? Do the seasons change, and does that affect what you drink? Do you have to drink stuff for the restaurant? What's current for you now? Not what's your favorite. I know you love Shannon, but what are you drinking now?
What I'm drinking now a lot is sake.
Sake?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I find it fascinating. I love sake.
Was there a ramp up to this, or you always felt that way?
No, there was a ramp up to it. It's a world that I never was able to deep dive into. It was like very, talk about a world that you feel scared when you enter it because of the language and all that. And I finally found the time since 3 years because I had a question in my mind talking about freshness in wine, fresh wine, drinkable. And while I was trying to understand it, I realized one of the drinks I like to drink and I found very refreshing was sake, which has basically no acid and is high in alcohol, which is a counterpoint of everything you're learning about what makes a wine a fresh wine. And then because of this question, and I realized that, wow, sake. I went more into it. And thanks to the fact that now there is really an amazing option of sake available in New York, which was not the case 10 years ago. When I started to be interested by sake, there was very few available. I had to ship some from Europe and Japan and all that. Now you are specialists and you have a lot of access to it. So I've been really into sake. So
get specific. I mean, my friend Yumiko at Grand Cru has taught me a few things. I know you love Chenin, so when you say wine, which is a broad category, you could focus to, here's a wine of love for me. When you talk about sake, is it like Junmai? Are there certain things, are there certain prefectures that, you realized are a favorite, or you're at the wide exploratory point?
I am still at the wide exploratory point. I went to Japan last year for the first time, but my taste right now goes to really low level of polishing and with ancestral technique. So all the Yamaha Bodaimoto, and with the producer.
Highly polished.
No zero, almost no polishing.
No polish.
Or very 10-20% polishing.
Is that perceived as more the natural way, less polishing, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. That's more going to the ancestral way of making sake. So which, like, you find a lot of comparison with wine, like the current stage of the sake in 90, and I think is why originally I was not really into sake at the very beginning, is I didn't understand the difference between them, because a lot of them were into that direction of extremely daiginjo, extremely polished with very specific type of yeast, and very Yamada Nishiki, for most of them, the rice strains, that to make sake as ethereal as possible. And I understood that 2 years ago, when a friend of mine, the French, is one of the most amazing sake experts in France. In fact, his name is Xavier Tuizat. He's at the Crillon, and Xavier just helped Japan. And he's official as yesterday that
Really?
sake has been recognized at the UNESCO on the list of humanity patrimony. So sake just been recognized yesterday, and thanks to Xavier's work. But anyway, Xavier told me 2 years ago, he said, Pascaline, you need to understand that today, the greatest sake, they need to be as ethereal as water. The greatest sake is the more reversed. In the current time, they need to be water-like. They need to disappear. And I was like, okay. And for me, I didn't resonate with that. And I started to taste other sake. And then I started to read more about sake. And this is a really postmodern approach to sake. When you taste sake in the 50s, 60s, and when you read about the previous ones, they were not made like that. And I got attracted to go back to the roots of rice fermentation. And so I'm drinking sake, but we're going to taste a rice wine from Vietnam.
Pour it out now. We'll talk about it in a minute. All right. So I asked you what you're drinking now. Your answer is sake. I'm not even going to ask you for other stuff because that's enough. My follow-up question to that is, because of that, is there more on the wine list at Chambers now?
Absolutely. And they also go extremely well with the food.
Well, I was going to say, you have to. Okay.
They are fantastic with the food.
All right. The second question is kind of the goofiest. What's Pascaline Lepeltier's favorite wine and food pairing? Now, this is where I'll go back, and I'm curious if what you tell me today is the same as in the past. It's not what you and I think is a great pairing. It's what you love and what you like. What works for you?
Oh, so many things. I must say, you're going to hate my answer, but...
I don't hate anything you do.
I am in a phase right now that I am more and more vocal about. I don't pair food and wine, I pair food and people.
So tell me how that works.
That means that I'm trying to understand, when I'm doing pairing at the restaurant for somebody, where is that person is in his life at that very moment, what is the experience, and how can I find a wine that resonates with him or her or they. And that is really the challenge, because after that, thanks to the food here allows me to do pairings in every direction, for example. But there is moment I don't want to drink champagne. I want to drink red wine. There is moment of me, I don't want to drink something complicated. I want to drink something simple. That's the way. So I really believe today, and I'm doing that with me, is how can I be more in tune with myself to give me what I would like to add. And then, of course, I will work on the best combination to play with the food I have in my plates. But this is
But that's secondary to, obviously, the first thing. That's not the first time people have answered that. They're not like, it's not about what food this pairs with. It's people have said who I'm with or the circumstance and all of that.
And I want to go back to that, especially now that we have a lot of crisis of people, like we say people don't drink wine anymore. There is people stopping to drink wine. But why? Because wine doesn't resonate with them. And I think today we need to reconnect to that and say, you can tell them the greatest pairing is champagne and roasted chicken, and it's true, there's something magical chemically happening there. But if you don't like sparkling wine, it doesn't make any sense. So I think right now my job as a sommelier, my job as a person, is to really try to understand better the circumstances, why I like something at that moment, what does resonate with me. And that's really, really, really important for me right now to focus on that. I
like that answer. Third question, and I've always asked this, and you've always answered it. And let me ask you the question, and then I'll set up for you. I'm asking you for your favorite wine restaurant and or bar. It's recommendations. Now, I'm not asking you for your top choices. I'm asking you to recommend places that do it well, have the selection, the vibe is nice. Now, just so you know, and this is one of the ultimate compliments, like I said, I've asked this question 288 times. I would say Chambers has come up as much or more than any single restaurant. So when I'm asking you the question, people are answering saying Pascaline's amazing. The selection she's put together is amazing. The vibe there is wonderful. The service, the food that goes with it. So what I'm saying is, in your mind, what are some places? Could be New York, could be in your travels, that do. And I always say this. Nobody's going to come up to you and say, "How come you didn't mention my restaurant on that stupid podcast? I thought we were
stupid podcast."
The question is, just tell me some, good places in your mind that are worth walking into.
Yeah. Bon, I must give him a big shout out because I think he's wonderful. But he worked here with his Ellis at Penny, Ellis Rubas-Shemenko.
And he was just cited as one of the hottest restaurants of this past year.
It's a great place, and it's thoughtful. I'm so happy for their success.
I agree with you. That's a great one. Give me one or two more.
I really like Fulgurance in Brooklyn. I think they're a little bit under
Laundromat.
Voilà, Fulgurance Laundromat. I think they're a bit under the radar because it's a tasting menu chef. But the work that Hugo and Pierre have been doing is fantastic. The list is so amazing, so great, so thoughtful.
So he brings in a lot of guest chefs and all of that. The wine collection that he has can service that. He'll just look at it and say, well, this guy's from the Basque region.
Absolutely.
And we're...
Yeah, they have a great pairing each time. So it's a residence restaurant. So they have chef coming.
Right,
and
that's what I'm saying. So
superb.
The type of food varies.
The type of food, and they are giving their chance to very talented chefs. But, the good news is there is a wine bar in the pipe. So they are going to have a wine bar coming in the next year. So you're going to be able to enjoy
look for Fulgurance's wine bar. Give me one more.
Popina.
James.
The James.
I love James.
He
was just on the show with the people from Crew because he helped put their list together, and Crew is putting out some of the best Thai food, and the wine list is crazy. Wazenhouse, Pinot Noir. I mean, some fun stuff.
Yeah. And last one.
Go ahead.
But Noritu with gin. Noritu in. That's
another one.
That breathe love.
So there's something about Noritu.
It's just amazing.
The wine is incredible. The selection is incredible. But I think the thing that he comes up a lot and you come up a lot is because of who Jin is and who you are. I think people nobody ever talks about Chambers and doesn't mention Pascaline. Nobody ever talks about Noritu and doesn't bring, it's part of that's what I'm talking about, the vibe. Mm-hmm. All right, so those are great ones. I appreciate that. Now, this is another one for comparison. Pascaline's favorite all-time wine. Aldo Sohm taught me a lesson. Initially, I was asking everyone, hey, what's the most expensive rare wine you ever tasted? Aldo said, why are you asking me that? Who cares about that? Let me tell you about the wine that was really important to me or changed the way I thought. What's that wine that, does it go back to the Dekim? Is it something else? What's the wine that really shifted, the way you think or made you more aware? It could be 1, 2, whatever.
So the one that shifted the way I'm thinking, oh my God. Yeah, of course the Ikem, but I think just, but there is two. There is one when I was really young sommelier, and when I started to, when I was at that school, we did harvest at my friend Benoît Courreau and at Domaine des Griottes. It was natural. Griotte, Griottes. It doesn't exist anymore. But they poured us a wine at Griotte during harvest. It was a 1959 Domaine Haquet, Chenin Blanc sans soufre. The Domaine Haquet doesn't exist anymore. There were two.
How do you spell domain?
Haquet. domain, like
Right.
estate, and Haquet, Haquet, and doesn't exist anymore. But it was a brother and sister estate that.
You still remember? I mean,
Oh
you're
my
still
God.
talking about them.
Yeah, because they believed from day one that no chemicals in their vineyard, no sulfur in their wine, and they were just making this Chenin and this Cabernet Franc. They were totally ostracized for decades by doing that. And the wine that I tried was so incredible and alive. And that day, amongst my friends, when we were doing harvest with all these natural wine people, with nothing in the wine, I really tasted that it was not only possible, but
Right.
it was beautiful. And so that was a very, very, very special wine in my life. And today there is another special wine that is giving me goosebumps every time I think about it. When I got married, friends of mine offered me a barrel.
I remember the
And that-
picture where you were standing around the barrel.
And that barrel, and now we are still been doing it every year. So since 7 years now, every year we get together. They all bring a little bit of must, and we ferment the wine together.
Oh,
and
wow.
the bottle is, and every year is that friendship and just this story of human kindness
Well,
together.
So part of that is, the connection and all of that.
Voilà, that's the wine. But there's Chenin, of course.
That's the way you answer that question. Last question, and I think you'd be terrific at this, is recommend to me the best wine around 15, 20, 22 bucks retail. And this is a selfish question. I added this question so I could tell my kids what good, cheaper wine, not cheaper, what less expensive wines they could buy. So recommend a red and a white, 15, 20, 22 bucks. I've always said you can go category and or maker. Like Muscadet to me for the money is a great value, but
Muscadet is
that's
amazing.
kind of a tip off. But give me some things. I'm curious to hear from you.
I think some of the greatest value right now, entry level, are from Portugal.
I agree.
I have been adding a lot of Portuguese wine on the list. I went 3 times to Portugal last year. So both categories, on both white and red. You get the entry level from people in the Dao and in Baraida. You have Antonio Madeira, you have Philippa
whites.
Pato. The whites are beautiful and they are under $20. And for the red, still, I'm going to call that time some Cabernet Franc from the Loire. You go to beautiful Chinon Bourgueil and Level, and you are below 20.
Bourgueil,
Bourgueil, and that's Cabernet Franc that I love.
So go back on the Portuguese. Give me a producer or two,
Yeah,
either that you're pouring or that you admire that falls in that category.
So absolutely. I just mentioned Antonio Madeira, which I really think it makes extraordinary wine, and Philippa Pato.
Okay,
Right.
classic. What about a Chinon?
Chinon en Bourgueil, Domaine Guyon in Bourgueil, et la Chevalerie, Domaine de la Chevalerie in Bourgueil is
Spell.
Chevalerie, Chevalri.
And you can get that for 20, 25 bucks?
Even less.
And it drinks.
Chevalerie, my God. I opened their entry-level wine, which is so good. I think it's $19 right now on the other side of the street, or even 18. I opened the same wine from 1989, like a month ago. It was unbelievable.
So
and they
for
age
that price, for that
forever.
ageability?
Yes.
That's awesome.
So Domaine de la Chevalerie is the best kept secret, and the one are so great.
That's what I'm looking for. All right, I didn't mention, but I post your answers on our social media so that people can sort of get on it and, try these wines. All right, we wrap up the show with a segment called the Weekly Wine Sip. Every week when we can, we taste a different wine on air. I asked you, listen, we're going to sit down and talk about the book and talk, but let's taste the wine that kind of fits what you're thinking, the restaurant, whatever. So you selected a Vietnamese rice wine. So now let's get into the specifics. What exactly are we drinking? Who's the producer?
So the producer is a collaborative work called Song Kai Distillery, which means like Mother Earth Distillery, and is a project that is led by a gentleman that I haven't met, but I really, really want to meet him. He's American and Vietnamese, and he grew up in California. His name is Daniel Nguyen, and he's an anthropologist. And 12 years ago, we went to Vietnam to study and work on the sustainable development of certain populations in the northern part of Vietnam and how agriculture could be part of that development. And he realized all this incredible knowledge of plants, of herbs, of techniques that were going to go to be forgotten. And so he went on to study on, but he realized that they needed to find an economical pathway. And one of that would have been to create a distillery and a brewery where all the plants, all the techniques will be used. And there is different products to be made with all this tribe, with all this knowledge. And so there is spirits with a gin, but there is that. And I told you I'm fascinating right now. I'm extremely humble, but I need to, because I don't know anything about it, but I need to turn my mind to Asia and to both aesthetics, gastronomy, and production of alcoholic beverages. I told you I was really looking into sake to understand the idea of freshness. And I discovered the world of rice. And this is what you are drinking. You are drinking a yellow rice or a sticky rice that has been fermented with the traditional techniques, which doesn't include in sake, you need to add koji. In salt, you need to have nuruk. You don't have anything. So it's a natural, spontaneous biotop fermentation that is occurring over there. That leads to this incredible, complex umami flavor. So the beverage is yellow. It's like...
All right, let's. I have an evaluation process. So let's talk about the color first. It's to me, it looks unfiltered. It's a kind of a, not deep, but a yellowish, not a bright yellow.
It's golden, yeah.
Golden yellow.
It's golden, yeah.
So that's the color. Let's put it up to the nose. Tell me your descriptors. Now, I've asked this question a million times and I wrestle with it. Is this a reductive nose or an oxidative nose or neither?
It's both.
It is both?
Yes.
This particular wine is both?
Yes.
Okay.
It can be both.
Because it's jam-packed with some of that. All right, so the nose is reductive, oxidative. What else do you get on the nose?
Oh, it's an extremely complex nose. It's a very savory nose. Like
You said umami, savory.
It just takes you to a world that often you find more in a kitchen, like a reduction of a jus, of a mushroom jus, of a mushroom broth.
Yes.
You need to really get into and like this very...
It is like, it's crazy. All right, so mouthfeel, just curious. Kind of a medium. It's not a thin wine. It's not an unctuous wine.
17% alcohol, but you don't feel it.
No.
So it's very dry, but a little bit of a creaminess. There is a bit of a fat. There is a bit of a feeling of oiliness present.
So on the palate, yes, on
Totally
the mouthfeel
dry.
on the palate, you get that fat. It's dry.
You don't
do
feel
the descriptors from the nose translate into the palate? That savory,
or it's
umami,
extremely savory.
mushroom-y?
Yeah, but even absolutely, and even a bit more because you had a little bit of all other compounds, including like fruit zest, like orange zest, curry, leafy. So you are, for the listener, is really close to what you can get in a vin jaune. You are in the vin jaune world, the yellow wine from the Jura, but with a little extra cereal grain quality and a little extra also fruit quality, think almost like papaya or a honeydew melon, and very citrusy at the end. And you are left with a sensation of salt, but like celery salt. It's not salt.
Right. Celery salt has more interaction than a regular salt. There's something going on there.
And so it's in fact salinity. And you have that extreme length. It's stay with you on the palate for long, like think about brown butter, this kind of sticking on the
right.
This kind of, and so it's an incredible compiling wine.
I'm going to ask you a question that's counter to what we've been talking about. Let's say you were sitting with friends and you paired this wine with people because at the right time, this was the right wine to put with those people. So we've gotten by that point. Now you want put a little food out. What foods would you pair with this? Where you don't...
so many. Spontaneously.
Well, there's a profile here.
Yeah,
there's so many probably points to...
So this is an umami bomb. So I would like to get more umami out of it. And so this umami bomb will be probably, I have a couple of options. Sea urchin. Just pure sea urchin. Something with tomato will work extremely well, especially dry tomato. Foie gras.
Sun-dried tomato?
Sun-dried tomato.
Foie gras, this would...
So I will explode with it. So I will play with this umami bomb because this is an umami bomb. And just get the So right now we have this.
Those are interesting.
And so just simple bites from my friends, But if you want to get something a little bit richer, we can of course create a dish like think about base of pasta with sea urchin, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
but that ramon,
foie gras is pretty.
You put a ramon with that. You put
the fat and the salt.
A monkfish liver. Exceptional with that.
Those are good ones. Those don't come up a lot, just so you know. All right, so let me describe this. How do I pronounce it? Ka?
Ka. Yeah,
Ka, natural yellow rice wine made from rice. It's Vietnamese. I will post more info on it. Thank you for pulling that out. That's a good choice. Let me do a quick wrap up. I want to get some info from you about the book and then we'll be on our way. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your pods. Leave a review if you like the podcast. And please subscribe. You'll have the podcast delivered to you every week. Follow us on Instagram at @SBenRuby, on X at @BenRuby, 2 different handles, but you can always use the hashtag The Grape Nation to find us on both. We are on Facebook at The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we will post Pascaline's wine list, her answers, some great, interesting recos, and the weekly wine sip, pretty much something we've tasted like we've never, ever tasted before. I'll post those on our social media sites. Pascaline, where is the best place in your mind to find and buy 1,000 Vines? What should we do?
All your small bookshop.
Go to your local bookseller first.
Go first. Here in New York, Kitchen Arts and Letters has it, and some of our fellow wine shop. Also,
you have wine shop friends. I know you were at
Flatiron
they
has
have a stack
some.
Of them, right?
Chamber Street Wines, of course, has some. But and your local wine, like your local workshop, I think is so important to support them. So Kitchen Art and Letters will always have some, and I sign them too. So this is amazing.
If I live in Kansas City and I don't have a great local bookshop, can I get it on Amazon?
Kitchen Art and Letters will ship to you.
They will. Okay.
They will.
So forget that. Just go to these guys and they'll ship to you. And you on social media, you're fairly active. I mean, you're not one of these people who swings what you do, but because you do so much fun, like Raj Par was here a few nights ago, you did a shot with all his wines and him. Fun to see that. Where can we follow you on social media?
Pascaline Lepeltier.
Okay. And are you primarily on Instagram?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Finally, a note from our friend Steven Bitteroff at Von Boden on Saturday, January 18th, 2025, which is about a month away. Riesling Fair is back in New York City after the pandemic. This is the first Riesling Fire since 2019. The 8th annual Riesling Fire will bring to New York City winemakers from many of the greatest states in Germany and Austria. There are 2 main events on Jan 18th, a walk-around grand tasting from 10A to 2P. And that evening, a Riesling Fire gala dinner, the greatest Riesling BYOB dinner in the world. Go to rieslingfire.com for pricing and availability. That's rieslingfire.com. That's rieslingfeier.com. I want to thank my friend for many years now who puts up with me, Pascaline Lepeltier. Congratulations on her book, 1,000 Vines. Thank you to our engineer, Armin, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.